Oh, hi there.
Good morning.
Good morning. I haven't had any bees follow me yet today, and I was expecting bees to follow me with all the springness going on. I just learned actually today there's a bird on this shirt somewhere. Oh, I've lost it. It's like a Where's Waldo.
It's on your arm right now.
There? It's a Where's Waldo situation. Carrie Ann came home with some new shirts for me one day. One of them had like bananas all over it, one of them had this, and she just went, well, you can't wear the same thing over and over again. The kids are going to start complaining. And like clockwork, Sawyer came over that morning, and I was wearing a shirt that I guess I wear all the time. And Sawyer said, Uncle Geoff, you can't wear that shirt. You always wear that shirt. And so it's true. You need to switch it up every once in a while. So here we go. And I'm more of like the greatest thing that happened when I got married was that Carrie Ann took my closet and just said, okay, just pick from this row of shirts and then just like pick a pair of pants. That's what I do. That's all this is. I just go, yep, and just kind of, there it is. And that's my outfits now. So I wonder how stylish a man can be. That's all it is. That's really all it is. Hey, that has nothing to do with James. Hey, welcome. We're going to be doing James today again. So if you got a Bible, we're in James 3, almost at 3rd James. There's no 3rd James. There's only a 1. Only 1st James. James, we figured out last week is, 2 weeks ago, is the half biological brother of Jesus. I say half because the other half is the Holy Spirit, and James doesn't have a Holy Spirit in his lineage, although the Holy Spirit was working through him as he was actually this is the first known written book of what we now know as the New Testament. James was writing to the new believers, and he was going, okay, because the new believers, it was kind of difficult, as you could imagine. The new believers had to kind of wrestle with this issue of, okay, so is the law gone? We know Jesus is coming back because he said so. What do we do in the meantime? Even though Jesus covers that a whole bunch, we needed a reminder, and James is the reminder. Plus, James is also, he writes letters, but he doesn't write letters to individual churches. He writes letters to us in general, us together as believers, which I really like. Paul, you kind of have to do all this extra research, and I have to kind of go into, okay, here's the church in Ephesus, and here was their problem, and here's the church in, I have to do that extra research. And with James, I really don't. I get to just kind of go, boom, and there he is. He's just talking about us as believers. I really like James. So today, at least in my Bible, it starts with, the heading is Taming the Tongue. But when I started kind of going into it, I went, it's a little bit different than what I was expecting as I kind of dove into chapter 3. So there's always going to be 2 themes. Well, not always, but most of the time, there's going to be 2 themes in James. He takes a chapter, and there's actually 2 things he's talking about. Today we're talking about what we say and wisdom. So 2 different things. I'm going to try my best to mesh them together, all teachery and whatnot. Speaking of being teachery, it is May, the end of May, near the end of May, which if you are a teacher, that's basically June. And June is, who cares, Kids are coming in June. The kids that come in June to school, bless them, because, when they show up, they're not really there and stuff. Sometimes I actually mess with them. Like, one time I actually gave a test, and I said, all right, we're taking a test today. Sit down, get a piece of paper, put the piece of paper in front of them and stuff. First question, what is Mr. Barrett's favorite color? The kids, some of them started actually writing. I don't know what they were writing, but they were all serious. They were like, and then halfway through them writing something, they went, wait a second, this isn't actually an academic subject. And they kind of looked up and looked around like, what else getting this? This is actual, and I was completely serious. Hey, you, yeah, paper, yeah, don't look at all the answers around you. And then that one kid that, gets everything, they're like, right, kind of puts down her pencil and kind of says, you aren't really going to grade this, are you? So that's kind of what June is all about. But we're in May, which is kind of like you're holding, it's like holding an airplane together as it's falling apart in midair as you're landing while your arms are tied behind your back. You can't see, and the plane's on fire. That's sort of May in teacher land. And as we're doing that, trying to land that aircraft, we noticed some behaviors jump to the forefront in May. One of them is just rampant amounts of defiance against teachers, because why are we here anyway? We already had the test you've been bragging about all year and threatening us with, and we've already done all the main assignments that you've always been talking about. We've already covered, in 6th grade you cover Greece, you cover Egypt, and you cover Rome. And they know that I'm toward the end of Rome, so what else can I possibly do to them or with them, you know? And so you get all these, coping things that kids do and stuff. And one of them is, I've seen a lot of, just open profanity toward me this year, which is really interesting. I've never experienced this quite like this before. This class is interesting. There was a kid this last week who, and I don't think he knew he was doing it, to be fair. I told him to do something, he didn't like it. He turned around, walked away, and spewed a stream of profanity as he walked away. And I confronted this kid, and I was like, hey, so, I don't know how to say this really. I don't know which word to address here, but all that you said is really offensive. And he looked back at me, and he's like, no, it's not. And he had said that HE double hockey sticks was the first one that he used. And he said, you're not even supposed to bring religion into school, Mr. Barrett. I can say that word. And I thought that was really funny that he kind of related it to religion, but he was still saying it and stuff. But that's kind of something that I am seeing as we go toward the end of the year. No one laughed. Everybody's really serious. Really? This is crazy. Yeah, things have gotten interesting in school. But when we talk about what they're talking about here in chapter 3, I did a little bit of fact checking, and I learned that James is not openly talking about just going off on someone profanity-wise. Now, that's probably not something good to do as a Christian, when you arrive at the gas station and they forget to give you back your card. Well, you bleeping, you probably don't want to do that as a Christian. That's normally not something that will affect your witness. We all know this and stuff. But when James is talking about what he's talking about today, he's actually going to be talking about a specific kind of language that people were using back then. So, if I go to chapter 3, it starts with, not many of you should become teachers. I love how it starts that way. Not many of you should become teachers, my fellow believers, because you know that we who teach will be judged more strictly. I'll stop right there. Staff lunchrooms in schools are really hard to be in at this time of year because everybody's belly aching so much. But one of the things that's really interesting is that if you go to, and there is online, everything that an Oregon teacher does is visible online, can be visible everywhere, If we are ever reprimanded for anything, that is public record. And I think there's a reason for that. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but teachers will bellyache about this and go, oh, I can't believe that, I can't post myself online doing this or whatever on Facebook, or I can't do that on Instagram or something like that. I think there's a reason for it, though. Throughout our human experience, we view people up here who teach others. So your life has to be kind of an example for everyone, because they don't just learn by what you say. They don't just learn by what you teach. They actually learn by looking at you. In fact, I would say in my young teaching career, about 75% of what kids learn from me is completely them watching how I do things. Completely. It's how I walk down the hallway. Do I say, hey, good morning? Or do I just kind of look down and not even make eye contact with them? They pick that up. Kids pick up your attitude. If there's something that happened at home, or if I woke up on the wrong side of the bed and I come and I stand in front of a group of students, they pick that up like clockwork. It's the first thing. They go, Mr. Barrett, is something wrong today? They notice that something is visually off. It is weird. I even get a lot of comments when I get a new haircut. It's either, man, looking fly, Mr. Barrett, or it's, so you got your haircut, I see. It's one of the two. That's why so many interesting shirts are great. You come to school and they're like, this is a little bit different. Kids pick up everything. And I think that, stopping for a long time here, but I think that's why teachers are held in such a great regard, and it really should stay that way, shouldn't isn't it? Every time a teacher gets reprimanded, it goes onto a website run by Teachers, Standards, and Practices. What's the C? Coalition, thank you. It's actually quite alarming, and please don't, like, in your spare time, look this up, because I have, and my goodness, I'm going like, you did what? But everything that we do and everything that we're reprimanded on, it actually goes into public record, and I think this is kind of the reason throughout, our human experience, teachers are up here. It needs to be, so here we go. We all stumble, verse 2, we all stumble in many ways. Anyone who is never at fault in what they say is perfect, able to keep their whole body in check. When we put bits into the mouths of horses to make them obey us, we can turn the whole animal. Or take ships, for example. Although they are so large and driven by strong winds, they are still steered by a very small rudder wherever the pilot wants to go. Likewise, the tongue is a small part of the body, but it makes great boasts. Consider what a great forest is set on fire by a small spark. The tongue also is a fire, a work of evil among the parts of the body. It corrupts the whole body, sets the whole course of one's life on fire, and is itself set on fire by hell. Man, he just throws that at you, doesn't he? So what he's saying actually has a lot of visuals. We're right now in the midst of the NBA playoffs, and if you follow sports, you're following probably the Portland Trail Blazers and, their attempt to get back somewhere. It's just the Trailblazer way. But you probably already have noticed that about 80% of what you see on TV when it comes to basketball, football, or any other professional sport has to deal with men who, from the stadium, look about that tall, right? But let's say you had different eyes and you decided to, factor in their egos. Would you say that those players now fill up an entire room? I think so. Take LeBron James, for example. Some of you are already chuckling. Take LeBron James, for example. You see that man walk into the room, and it almost looks like he thinks that he is 10.5 feet tall. That is kind of how he views himself. LeBron James no longer goes to practice anymore, by the way, because why do you need to practice if you're the best? That's a quote, actually, from him. You can look it up. He also doesn't like coaching. In fact, a coach should garner to LeBron James' way of playing. That's why when he went to LA, the first conversation that he had was not with the general manager of the Lakers, it was actually with the coach. It was, how many times am I going to get the ball? It's the LeBron James way, right? When LeBron James wants to take a great player and bring him onto his team, for example, Kevin Love from Lake Oswego, Oregon, I actually got to see him play when he was in high school, and man, that guy is amazing. But LeBron James once came and had a conversation with Kevin Love. The conversation with Kevin Love wasn't, hey, you want to play on the same team? This could be a great team, you and I. No, it was, hey, why don't you come with me? We'll win a championship. But only if you come with me. That's the LeBron James way. But as we start condemning LeBron James, there's things in our own lives that kind of do the same thing, right? LeBron James has one tongue, and yet it has made him that tall. The same is true in the Bible when he's talking about the next thing he's going to talk about. From one aspect, you can proclaim God and praise God and have a great ministry, but the tongue can destroy all of that just like that. So here we go. If you go down to verse 9, it says this. With the tongue we praise our Lord and Father, and with it we curse human beings who have been made in God's likeness. Out of the same mouth comes praise and cursing. My brothers and sisters, this should not be. Can both fresh water and salt water overflow from the same spring? My brothers and sisters, can a fig tree bear olives, or a grapevine bear figs? Neither can a salt spring produce fresh water. There are a couple things that you can do as a believer, as a Christian, to thwart or otherwise destroy your ministry. I'm moving because I'm noticing that all of the wonderful balloons are like in the way of people's faces. So I'm moving this way. So yeah, there we go. I'll move that way soon. Okay, so as James is talking here, he's not just talking about open profanity. There is such a thing, and there always has been through a lot of languages, called open profanity. And there's actually a book that I used to have, and it's called, don't judge me, it's called How to Swear in 10 Languages. And I got it when I started teaching because there's a lot of different languages in schools now. And I wanted to know what kids were saying. And so I'm aware that there's a lot of different languages that could say a lot of derogatory things to tear me down. In fact, you should hear that, kind of like walking away when kids don't think I know what they're saying. But James isn't talking about that. I did some research, and apparently what James is talking about is not just open, mean language at all, or different things that mean the same thing with, I guess, more proper words. Here's what the research kind of says. When the Bible is addressing cursing, especially James, it is not addressing profanity. These may be offensive and inappropriate and not something for Christians to do, but it is mainly addressing comments which tear down others. Now, if I go even deeper into the original language that James is using, he's actually talking about overly sexualized comments that tear down others. Comments that tear down the image that someone was created in. And I guess this was a problem that Christians in the first round of Christians used to do to each other, because it was pretty common in society. When you didn't like someone, you openly criticized the way that they looked, you criticized sexually the way that they looked, and you criticized their family line in the same respect. And what James is saying is that when you do that, you run a very serious equation. The equation is, if you believe in the Son of God, you know that he came to die for these amazing creatures that he made. Amazing creatures that bear his exact image. You following? If you criticize openly the image that someone is made in, you are criticizing the master creator himself, because he created those creatures himself. In fact, going a step further, those creatures are created for a specific purpose and are created to look and behave and act like God himself. We don't always make it, but that's the way it's supposed to be. And if you're criticizing someone that way and tearing down their features, tearing down the way that they look, tearing down the way that they act, you are criticizing God himself. That is what James is trying to say. That seems a lot more pertinent, doesn't it? It seems a lot more heavy than just profanity. Now, profanity is probably not something you want to use as a believer anyway, but tearing down a person themselves does exactly that. It destroys, it kind of criticizes openly the maker himself. Now, there's something that we do, even Christians, I've heard Christians do this, but definitely my students. I've come up with a creative way of solving the problem, but it doesn't always thwart it. There's something that other people are not allowed to do to other religions, but that people are allowed to do to our religion. Have you ever heard a Christian use Jesus' name, not only in vain, but to refer to a bad situation? I'm only going to say this once, but the phrase God awful. Have you heard of that before? I've heard of that, actually. I've heard Christians say that. In fact, I've heard friends of mine that are Christians say that. And it hurts. I've actually heard kids walk by me, and when they don't like a decision that I've made in class, they'll say, Jesus. And I used to say, just to kind of get on their nerves a little bit, I used to say, oh, it's just Mr. Barrett now. I don't go by that. But I don't do that anymore. I figured that's probably not good either. But it bothers me. It really bothers me. It really does, because they're not only using Jesus' name in vain, they're criticizing my Lord, but I'm not allowed to do that to anybody else's religion. I have had Muslim students in class. I'm not allowed to publicly stand up and go, man, Allah stinks, or something like that. I'm not allowed to criticize their God, because that would be insensitive, but people are openly allowed to criticize my God and call it fine. In fact, it's kind of funny to me that we don't use other religions in our swear by context. We don't say, Buddha, or something like that. I mean, that wouldn't make sense to us, because Buddha doesn't bear the same weight as Jesus Christ himself, right? And so Jesus Christ is the name that you swear by. I just find that interesting. Moving on, there's a couple different things he's talking about next. Two different kinds of wisdom. And There we go. Yep, 2 different kinds of wisdom. So let's just dive into that there. So in verse 13 it says, "Who is wise and understanding among you?" And the next part is awesome. "Let them show it by their good life, by deeds done in the humility that comes from wisdom. But if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast about it or deny the truth. Such, quote, wisdom, unquote, does not come from heaven, but is earthly, unspiritual, demonic. For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you will find disorder and every evil practice." There's a guy who I have a poster of in my room. Sorry, so many school references today. I must be thinking about that a lot. There's a guy, I have 2 different posters of him in my room. You might recognize his name. His name is Steve Prefontaine. And he was still regarded by Nike, still is regarded by Nike, to be one of the greatest American track runners of all time. And he really is. By 1973, Steve held every U.S. record from 2,000 meters to 10,000 meters, and he held some world records as well. When he went to the Olympics, he actually finished in 4th place because Steve had this underlying ability to run from the front, run as fast as he could, as hard as he could, and still finish in the front. The object he was aiming for was actually to get so far in front that by the time that other racers wanted to catch him, it would be absolutely impossible for them to catch him. And it worked, actually. His coach, one of the greatest genius minds of sport, Bill Bowerman, used to hate this. In fact, when Steve first came to practice, being one if not the greatest runner in University of Oregon's history, Bill Bowerman, the first practice, actually said to him, "Pre, you have to stop running this way." He actually had him run a 1,500 meter, which is almost a mile. And Pre went out, I believe he went out in 45 seconds. He ran a 45-second lap. And he still had a few laps to go. His second lap actually was a little bit slower because he couldn't keep doing the same thing. He couldn't keep running at the same pace. Yet no one caught him. He outran the entire team, freshmen all the way through seniors. And he got to the end, he stares at the coach and he says, "What? I ran a great race." The coach looked at him, Bill Bowerman, and said, "Yes, but from my calculation, you could have been 10 seconds faster, if not more, if you had only waited. You could have run that 45-second lap at the very end of the workout." And Steve and his coach constantly butted heads. Now this, of course, gave birth to the greatest at the time, and one of the greatest now running shoe corporations of all time, Nike, and actually began to produce shoes for athletes, and not just for just people producing shoes and then giving them to athletes, which Adidas was doing at the time. But Steve lacked wisdom. He had a lot of personal merit, and he had a lot of focus, and he had a lot of drive. He used to say that if I turn this into a pure guts race, no one could possibly beat me anywhere that I go. And that's true. That's very true. Unless you come across a person that might be a little bit better than you. There is a way to outrun someone that's better than you, and Steve didn't do it at the Olympics. When you're outrunning a person that's better than you, what you want to do is just hang with them and get inside their head. You want to make them doubt everything they think and believe about themselves. And that's exactly what people did to Steve. In the Olympics, I forget what actual race he was running. I believe it was the 10,000. He held the record in the 2 mile, but the Olympics didn't run the 2 mile. And so he's in the 10,000 meters. I apologize if I've got this wrong. You can correct me later. And he's the 10,000. This is a 400-meter track. That's a lot of laps. You don't need to do the math right now, but if you are doing the math, it's just a lot of laps. And really, the goal of the 10K in the Olympics is to find out what pace the lead runners are going to run, the best guys in the world, and then see if you can hang on their back door. What you want to do is hang on their right or left shoulder and just chase them around every turn. You want to kind of hug their backside toward the middle, like the apex of the short corners, and then during the straightaways of the track, you want to just hang on their shoulders so that they can kind of hear you breathing behind them. Now you might think to yourself, well, that's not going to do any good. You're still running the same pace as them. Yes, you are, but they are overworking themselves where it counts, which is up here. And that's what the front runners did to Steve. Steve went out fast. He went out like a bolt of lightning. And soon, he was going against some of the greatest runners in the world, which are from Sweden and Norway at the time. And they kind of had this smile, if you watch the footage, on their faces around lap 5, because they realized that this kid from Coos Bay, Oregon, is running as if he's a gunslinger, and it's one of those, Wild West movies, and it's high noon and stuff, and he's just coming right at you and everything, and they know that it's more of a chess game. Now, Steve took fourth, of course, in that when he actually could have, I think, won the race, but Steve had this other problem in life, and I've actually met a couple people that knew him. Steve had a drinking problem, and it didn't used to get in the way of his of sports for him, really. He would just come to practice hungover once or twice, which turned into every time. He would adamantly, just decline that he had been drinking the night before to his coach, and then he would, after the first part of the workout, he would throw up all over the track, and then just continue to run. But it didn't matter to him because he went, I'm still putting up great numbers. What are we talking about? This isn't a problem for me, right? This isn't a problem for me yet. Steve, though, lacked the wisdom to see that it was a problem. And later down the road, as the problem kind of increased, things would become difficult for him. In fact, he didn't have coping skills for the time after the Olympics. He actually devolved into a drunken stupor for about 4 months, until Coach Bowerman finally found him working at a bar that was frequented by a bunch of other college kids that were University of Oregon alumni. And he actually came to him and said, "What are you doing here?" And Steve pushed back and said, I'm doing this. I'm not a runner anymore. And it kind of destroyed his life to a certain extent. And Coach Bowerman was actually the guy that kept him on track. And, there we go, that's a fun. Kept him on track and actually helped him try and get back to the Olympics. But Steve's demons continued to follow him, even though he now had more wisdom. Now, how much wisdom can you have at his age? He was 23. But he had more wisdom than he used to have when he was 18 or 19. And he would go to workouts religiously. He would show up to the University of Oregon and run with their athletes. He ran with Oregon Track Club. He actually got some pretty good mentors in line too. And he began to actually mentor some kids that were in college himself. It seemed like he was making a difference. Until one night, in 1973, Steve decided to go to a party. He had just run the greatest race of his life, arguably, his comeback event, which is now the Prefontaine Classic, in which he actually invited a whole bunch of runners from Sweden that had previously beat him, and proceeded to annihilate them in the 2-mile event and set the U.S. record at the time by about 5 seconds, which is a lot of time in track. He then decided to take his friend back home, his friend who was getting sick, and from a lot of drinking. And Steve had been drinking himself. His own problem was beginning to get the better of him. Steve, in fact, drank so much that when he jumped into his MGB, he actually had consumed twice the amount of the Oregon legal limit for driving. He was at 0.16. He was twice the legal limit when he jumped behind the wheel. When he was cruising down the road, he actually did make it to his friend's house and dropped his friend off, but when he was cruising back, his car was going, they think about roughly 80 to 85 miles per hour around a turn, of course couldn't make it, and flipped over, killing America's greatest track runner of all time. Now, what I want to camp on is not the fact that Steve could have been a great track runner. I mean, he was only 24 when he died. He could have set more U.S. and Olympic records. He could have gone back to the next year's Olympics and gotten a gold medal. He was arguably the greatest runner of his day at the moment that he died. But I want to actually camp on what James is talking about with being a teacher. If Steve Prefontaine had kicked the habit, had gotten rid of his problem that was overriding his earthly wisdom, and actually gotten true divine wisdom, I just wonder how many kids he could have coached. How many kids he could have taken from wherever place they were in life, and he came from little Coos Bay, Oregon, a working class town where nobody went to college. He was actually the only kid in Coos Bay at the time to go to college, fun fact. His parents were immigrants from Germany. His mom barely spoke a lick of English. And he went to the University of Oregon and went to the Olympics on a full ride scholarship from the University of Oregon, and then joined the AAU after that. Imagine the kids that he could have talked to. Imagine the small towns he could have gone to and told them, you know what, with this talent right here, you can go to college too. You can be just like me. Imagine the large inner city kids he could have worked with who were constantly getting in trouble with the law and may have been into gangs, that he could have gone in and said, you can get out of this. You can go make something of your life. But his earthly wisdom was the thing driving him, not divine wisdom. In verse 17 it says, the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. Peacemakers who sow in peace reap a harvest of righteousness. Steve Prefontaine's picture still adorns a lot of buildings. And in fact, when I was at a Bible camp teaching kind of at another church up in Eugene, we went to this Nike store. It was kind of the Nike, I guess it's the Nike store where they roll out all of their new gear in showroom form first. And of course, being a Beaver fan, I had a little bit of trouble being in that town, but I got over it because it's Nike. So I went into the store, and adorned on the wall is this 7 or 8 foot high Steve Prefontaine dashing down the track in black and white, wearing the first Nike shoes. And I began to think to myself as I saw that, wow. Should we celebrate this, or should it be a cautionary tale? Should we celebrate the fact that he was all these great things, or should we say to ourselves, that's the mark to improve upon. We need to do better than that. Should we go in there and say, man, why aren't there more runners like Steve? Or should we say, I'm glad that there aren't any more runners like Steve? And actually, I follow a lot of runners on this fitness app, Strava, where everybody posts their workouts online or anything like that. I just use it to keep track of how many workouts I do and that kind of thing. There's a really cool guy on there, Christian guy, that now I'm spacing the name of. Adam Kimball is his name. And he was the last guy to run coast to coast in the United States. And while he was doing it, he posted a lot of videos to YouTube. And they are mostly all Christian related. It's kind of funny to see an athlete that's that successful, and every race that he enters, he wins. He's an ultra marathoner, so he runs 100-mile races are his specialty. Pretty much every 100-miler he enters, he's going to win. The guy is phenomenal. But every time he wins, he posts a verse. He doesn't say, yeah, I did that, did this other thing, got first place. He doesn't even mention that. You have to actually look it up or find a news clipping to know that he won the race. In fact, he just says, thank you, God, for giving me another day to run like this. Thank you for giving me this gift of running. I hope I can touch some lives with this thing. That's pretty cool. Let's pray. God, would you help us use your wisdom in our life and not our own wisdom? May our wisdom reflect everything that is yours. May it be peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy, and impartial and sincere.